Boldwood presents The Secret Love of a Gentleman, written by Jane Lark and read by Sophie Warner. Chapter 1. Robert Marlow leaned on a windowsill in the drawing-room, looking out at the garden. A figure darted across the lawn, so fast it might have been the shadow thrown by a cloud scurrying along on a high wind. If the movement was lighter, someone in white, it might have been a ghost in the way it was there, then gone. But the figure had worn pale blue, and it was not midnight, but midday. It was not a spectre. He would lay strong odds it was the skirt of Caroline Kilbride's dress, disappearing behind the hedge, perhaps a ghost of sorts then. She had scurried across the lawn like a fleeing animal, her fingers holding the brim of her bonnet down to hide her face. He assumed she left the house because he had arrived. He had not even come within 10 feet of her. It did not bode well for the next few weeks. "Do not take it personally," his brother-in-law Drew said in a low tone, resting a palm on Rob's shoulder. "Caro does not appreciate company." Rob faced him, "And male company particularly. Yes, I know. Are you sure it is a good idea for me to stay here if it will disturb her?" "Life must go on, Robbie. She cannot orchestrate what we all do. Caro will keep to her rooms as she does most of the time. I wish she would be braver, but I do not have the heart to force her into facing her fears, and yet nor will I pander to them. She will cope. It is not only Mary and I who live here. We have male servants after all. It is just because your presence is unfamiliar and so she feels threatened. I could stay at John's. It is not too late to change my plans. Rattling about your brother's monstrosity of a mansion on your own? No, Robbie. Mary invited you for the summer because she wants to spend time with you. I can ride over daily from John's. His property is only a few miles from yours. And kick around there alone at night, bored. Do not be foolish. You'll stay and Caro will adjust. It is only for the weeks of summer. Caro will survive. Or hide. Well, more likely that. But either way, it will do her no harm. And I've been looking forward to your company."
"Uncle Bobby!"
George, Drew's son, charged across the room and barreled straight into Rob's legs. The boy was barely 2 and a little tyke, but adorable despite it. The sound of the R in Rob's name was beyond George, and thus Rob, who was known to his family as Robbie, was Uncle Bobby to his nephew. Rob leaned down and picked the child up by his chubby arms. He tossed him in the air, caught him, and turned him upside down, dangling him by his ankles. George giggled uncontrollably. His nephew was a good reason to stay, as was his infant niece, whom his sister Mary cradled on her arm while she spoke with their mother. Rob loved the children. There was something very endearing about being hero-worshipped by George. His younger brothers never looked up to him with respect. Mary was 18 months older than him, the closest to him in age and temperament. Rob had been scarcely 18 when Drew and Mary eloped, but her notorious husband had always treated Rob like a grown man, and Rob enjoyed his company.
"Uncle Bobby, I want to fly!"
George cried. "Do you little rapscallion?" Rob carefully lowered him to the floor, head first. The boy rolled over, stood and raised his hands, asking to be lifted again. "Your Uncle Robbie is not going to swing you about all day, George," Drew said.
"Boats!"
the boy yelled. Rob ruffled the child's hair. "Yes, I will play boats and kites and ball, George. We'll play many games."
"Auntie Caro too."
"Perhaps," Drew navigated that answer. "If you are ready, Robbie, we should return to John's." His mother stood. "I am ready." Mary also stood, with the baby sleeping in her arms. "We shall see you both at John's tomorrow. I believe we have even persuaded Caro to come, because the children are with us." A frown creased his mother's brow. "I feel very sad for Caroline. I wish there was more I could do to help. She looks so uncomfortable the moment I begin a conversation, though." "She is not unhappy, Mamma," Drew said. "She would be more distressed to think you pitied her." Unease swung over Rob, a heavy cloak of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He did not want to remain at John's after the family left. Drew was right. It would be too quiet, but nor did he want to make Caroline unhappy. He could go home with his parents or stay with any of his uncles and aunts, but Mary had invited him, and he liked it here. He had finished at Oxford. This summer was his time to plan his independence. Rob was the odd one out in his extended family. Among all of his cousins, he was the only firstborn son without a title or a vast inheritance awaiting him. He was the grandson of an earl on his paternal side and a duke on the maternal side, but not in any line of inheritance. His birth gave him the freedom to do whatever he wanted to do with his life, though. His life could have purpose rather than wealth. He did not need an occupation as his ducal brother John chose to provide Rob with an income, but he wanted to support himself. The cheque for his first quarter's allowance had been handed to him on his 21st birthday. Rob ought to be grateful. He was, but the idea of living off John jarred brutally. John had everything, wealth, a title, and he was skilled at everything too, managing his estates, presenting bills in the House of Lords. He drew sketches like a master artist, sang with the voice of an opera singer, and played the pianoforte equally well. Rob wanted to make something of himself, to have an influence on society, to do something important, or at least notably successful. He wanted to make a mark on the world without a leg up from anyone in his family. His cousins and his brother Harry mocked his philanthropist thoughts, but it could not be a bad thing to want to make a difference. He wanted a position in government. That was his great plan, to achieve a seat in the House of Commons and change society for the better from there. The flaw in his great plan was that to be elected, he needed money for a campaign. He could ask for a loan from anyone in his family, but they would simply offer him one of their pocket seats. Many landowners had areas where they could manage the local men to vote for a man of their choice. The whole idea of that rankled. It would hardly fulfill his moral desires if he had acquired a seat dishonestly. There would be no pride in that. What mattered most to him was being able to respect the man he looked at in the mirror, and if that man was going to stand up for the poor, he could not do so knowing his seat in Parliament had come from his family's money. In fact, the only detail in his plan to date was that his plan did not become John-shaped. This summer would give him time to explore the constituencies that had a House of Commons seat he might stand for, and to identify how to fund his campaign. "Robbie?" His mother touched his elbow. "We should leave." He had been lost in thought. He agreed, bowing his head. He had been the one to drive her over here to visit Mary, because his father was busy with John, looking at something on John's estates. He kissed his sister's cheek and his niece's forehead, his fingers brushing over the wispy hair on her soft head. Another benefit of staying with Mary and Drew was that he did not feel like a lesser mortal, because he was not constantly comparing himself to John. Drew's palm rested on Rob's shoulder. "We shall see you at John's garden party tomorrow, and we will have a merry time this summer." Chapter 2. Lady Caroline Kilbride stood alone inside the house, watching everyone else gathered on the broad stone terrace and the lawn beyond it. Her stomach felt as though it contained wriggling frog spawn, not butterflies. There were dozens of people here, adults and children. The sound outside, full of laughter, gleeful screams and merry conversation. Her brother Drew was among them, playing cricket on the lawn with others, and many of the children. Her sister-in-law Mary was sitting on a blanket beneath a canopy with other women. She held their daughter Iris in her arms. Many of the women had young children. It was more than 3 years ago that she first came to the Duke of Pembroke's ostentatious Palladian mansion. She felt then as she felt now, overwhelmed, not by the house or John's wealth, but by the people. Her heart pulsed with the beat of a bird's wings, and a lump of nausea pressed at the back of her throat, urging her to be sick. She felt like a parasite, a divorcee hiding among these happy couples, clinging to her brother and sucking life from his family. She hated the need to rely on Drew. Her shame pressed down on her daily with a steel-hard pain. Sometimes it felt as though her former husband's hands were still about her throat, cutting off her breath. Sometimes it felt as though she had not breathed for 3 years. This family accepted her, all of them. Her misery was of her own making. But the perfect lies of these people reminded her she'd failed to be a loved wife and mother. Guilt, shame, and longing to be able to change the past were her constant companions. If she was at Drew's house, she would retire to her rooms, but she had agreed to come here with them, and so she must wait until her brother and his wife left. Mary said she would need help with Iris and George, but there were enough adults to manage all the children. "Bowl, hurry!" John yelled from his position behind the wicket, holding up his open hands, waiting to catch the batsman out. The ball was thrown by an uncle, and his cousin was caught out. Some of the women and children cheered, others booed, depending on whom their allegiance lay with. John slapped his uncle's shoulder and his uncle laughed. The Pembroke family were a harmonious clan, and Drew was one of them these days. Mary's brother Robbie walked up to bat. A moment later, the crack of hard leather hitting willow broke across the conversation in the open space. Robbie ran. When the rest of the family left, he was to stay with Drew and Mary for a few weeks. He raced from one wicket to the other, tapping the bat on the ground and running back. He was taller than most men, lithe and athletic. A tingle of discomfort rippled through her nerves. Drew constantly complained about her nerves. The doctor had told her, "It is just that you have an overly sensitive nervous system." He had prescribed laudanum, but she'd never used it. She did not want to feel tired and ill as well as mad.
Uncle Bobby!
Caro's gaze turned to Drew's son. George ran to join the game. Mary's father caught him and hoisted a squealing George onto his shoulders. Her nephew and niece were Caro's sole happiness. She spent as many hours with them as she could. They were the reason she was here. Applause echoed over the lawn as Robbie ran his fourth length and beat the ball back to the wicket. He turned and braced himself to hit again, his dark brown hair falling forward over his brow. His colouring was different from most of the Pembroke families. The old Duke's pitch-black hair and pale blue eyes had travelled through his family, but Robbie had his father's colouring, not his mother's. Drew told her yesterday that Robbie was concerned about staying because he thought she would feel uncomfortable. Drew had waited for her to say she did not mind. She had not answered. She would feel uncomfortable, but she would not discuss her silent madness with her brother. Guilt and shame ate at her, not only because of Albert's, her former husband's, behaviour, but also because she still loved him. Feelings could not simply be snuffed out like the flame of a candle. She could neither excuse nor forgive herself, so she did not expect Albert to. Perhaps Drew ought to have her admitted to an asylum and be done with it. She felt as though she were trapped in a glass cell anyway. A raucous cheer went up. Robbie's wicket had been smashed. "Shall we break?" John shouted. "I'm in need of refreshment." Several male voices agreed. Her heartbeat pounded violently in her chest as the men walked towards the terrace. Drew spotted her. Of course he knew where to look. He knew she'd be inside the house. He lifted his hand and waved as he peeled away from the others who walked towards their wives and mothers. She and Drew were not particularly alike, apart from their eyes. They had the same mother and different fathers. He had carried insecurities too, before he married Mary. These days, he was as confident in his own skin as any man could be. He was at peace with himself and deeply in love with Mary. Mary completed him. She was the other half that had made him whole. Caro was the shackle about his ankle. "Caro," he said as he walked across the terrace to the open French door. "Come and sit with Mary and I."
"I am happy here."
Her lips trembled when she tried to smile. "Are you really?" He smiled wryly, one eyebrow lifting to mark his disbelief. "Come on." He held out his hand. "You can keep George under control." Drew was generous and kind, but also, unfortunately, stubborn. He grasped her hand.
Kate will be insulted if you do not at least come outside for a little while.
The Duchess will not notice, Caro said, but she gave in to his urging, rather than cause a scene, letting him lead her across the terrace. Touch was another thing that assaulted her overly sensitive nerves. She did not mind Drew and the children touching her, but others. If anyone offered an arm to lead her into dinner, or held out a hand to ask her to dance, even if they accidentally touched her, her senses screamed in revulsion. Yet she craved touch. She felt starved of it at times. It was just another anomaly of her madness. Drew's broadest smile flashed.
She notices, he said in a jovial tone. They all do, but admittedly no one thinks badly of you for hiding.
The family groups were gathering around refreshment tables that the servants had set up on the lawn. The younger children ran between people's legs, playing a game of chase.
Enough, children! You will knock one of us over!
Caro flinched at the deep, dictatorial tone of Lord Wiltshire's voice. It rattled through her nerves. Drew's hold tightened on her hand, as though he felt her hesitation. Caro focused on Mary and Iris in her arms, her heartbeat galloping. This panic was irrational, she knew, yet her whole body screamed its desire to run away. Fear hemmed her in and tightened about her chest like a band of iron, making it difficult to breathe. Flashes of memory sparked, images, there, then not, like lightning. Moments of pain when she was struck, moments of embarrassment when she was bruised, moments of self-disgust when Albert had berated her for her failings.
Look what I found,
Drew said to Mary. Mary patted a vacant space beside her on the blanket, smiling a welcome. Caro fought the growing pain in her chest as she sat down. The sight of Iris asleep in Mary's arms eased Caro's panic, replacing the emotions with love.
Would you hold her?
Mary asked.
Then I can find something to eat. I'm so hungry.
Yes, of course. Mary was a good friend, a good sister. She never made Caro feel uncomfortable or unwanted. When Caro took Iris from Mary, her little hands opened, her fingers uncurling and stretching as her eyelids flickered, but she did not wake. Drew reached across Caro and brushed his daughter's cheek with a hooked forefinger. Iris's eyelids popped open, and she looked at her papa. "Pop it," he whispered. Iris gurgled in recognition.
Auntie Caro!
George barreled into Caro's side, tumbling onto the blanket with a roll. She lay one arm about George, while the other braced Iris, and the world was at peace.
I hit a ball with Uncle Bobby,
George announced.
I held the bat with him.
The next words had come from above them. Mary looked up. Caro did not, as Robbie's voice grated on her nerves.
I hit it far,
George declared, slipping from beneath Caro's arm to hug his mother instead. Clever boy, Mary praised her son. Perhaps Uncle Robbie will teach you how to hold the bat yourself while he stays with us.
I cannot believe I missed this marvellous feat, Drew said. You will have to do it again after luncheon so I may see you, George.
Robbie stood too near. Caro's nerves tingled. She wished he would go away. Instead, he knelt on the end of the blanket near Mary's feet. Panic claimed Caro in full force. Her chest became so tight, the breath had to fight its way to her lungs. Iris cried out as Caro's fingertips pressed into her soft thigh. Sorry, perhaps she's hungry. I will feed her before I eat myself. Mary gave her son a squeeze and let him go and stood. Come along, little one. She reached down so Caro could pass Iris back. Robbie's gaze fell on Caro as she gave Iris up. She could feel him not just looking but watching her. As Mary walked away, Drew sat next to Caro, in the space Mary had moved from. He leaned back on his hands and stretched out his legs.
You know, your mother is taking your absconding personally, he said to Robbie.
George crawled over to his father. With nothing to do with her arms, Caro adjusted her sitting position, raising her knees within the skirt of her dress and hugging her legs, as she tried to slow her breathing and her heartbeat.
Mamma is not ready for me to leave the nest. We are all growing up too fast.
Drew raised his eyebrows for a moment as he pulled George onto his lap and ruffled his hair.
And I snatched Mary from her nest. She does not hold that against you. You're giving her grandchildren. It is an exchange. I will just be a loss. Shall I tell her to stop henpecking and let you fledge?
Drew joked.
Papa spoke to her. He knows I cannot live on his estate. There is nothing for me to do there.
Of course you cannot, if you wish to sow wild oats, Drew said.
That is not my style anyway,
Robbie answered. At Robbie's age, Drew had been wild, playing with danger, fighting everyone and everything. Drew's lips parted in a smile.
So your brother told me.
Harry? Rob asked. Harry, Drew confirmed. They both laughed for a moment as George climbed over his father, too restless to sit. Caro did not understand what was funny. When she first came here and saw Robbie, he had been a jolly 18-year-old youth. As a man, he seemed more serious than most men his age. His male cousins of a similar age showed no interest in the children. They kept to their own group. Robbie never stood with them. However, Harry, Mary's second-in-age brother, did. He must be 19. Obviously, from Drew's and Rob's laughter, Rob found his brother amusing for some reason.
Well, you may tell Harry to mind his own business, not mine, Rob said with a smile.
But younger brothers are born to be a thorn in the side. Mary and I are working on one for George, solely for that purpose.
I have never been a thorn in John's. You have never had a chance. He wins any fight with one of his domineering glances.
He has a way of making a man feel as small as a mouse.
I ignore those looks,
Rob said.
I do not risk those looks.
I never give him cause to deploy that look on me, Drew joked, and another laugh was shared. George clambered over his father's shoulder and tumbled down. Robbie leaned forward, reaching out a hand to slow George's fall. Instinctively, Caro leaned away from Robbie. Robbie did not move back. He crawled forward and tickled George's tummy. George giggled.
No, Uncle Bobby, no.
When Robbie stopped tickling him, George crawled to Caro, escaping, still giggling. Robbie's gaze and Drew's followed George. A blush burned in Caro's cheeks as the rhythm of her heartbeat gathered pace. She pulled George onto her lap and hugged him, perhaps a little too tightly, but it helped relieve her nerves.
I am sorry I did not see you yesterday, Caroline,
Robbie said. He was being polite, nothing else, but her senses recoiled. He must know she had avoided him.
Caro?
Drew prompted when she did not answer, as though she were a child to be corrected. Her gaze lifted to Robbie's eyes. They were blue, but a darker, greyer blue than Mary's. Caro had not been this close to him to notice the colour before. He smiled a smile that made him seem approachable, but even though he behaved with good manners, her nerves still screamed at the idea of being too close to him. Perhaps her problem stemmed from Albert disliking her talking to or dancing with other men. That had always been an excuse for him to raise his hand and strike her, or perhaps it was the knowledge of the harm a man could inflict. Robbie rested a palm on the rug, leaning sideways. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and she could see his forearms were covered in dark hair. George broke free from her embrace.
Papa, I need the pot,
he declared with extreme urgency. He always waited until the last moment. I will take you. Caro moved to rise. Drew pressed a hand on her shoulder. Stay here, Caro, I shall take him. He rose, winking at her, with his head turned so Robbie would not see. Her mean brother was deliberately making her endure Robbie's company. Drew's attitude towards her flighty nature was to stubbornly ignore her fear of situations. He thought it would help her overcome the terror she felt.
I will do my best not to discompose you when I stay at Drew's, Robbie said.
Caro's gaze spun back to Robbie. every one of her nerve endings howling. Her arms gathered up her knees, hugging her legs, clinging to herself. She felt as if she were in the midst of a swirling sea. A man's laugh boomed behind them. Caro unfurled and rose instantly. She could not do this. Uncertain where she was going, she just walked in a direction that was away from everyone. Caroline. Her name was spoken quietly. Caroline. Robbie had followed. She glanced back, her gaze apologizing. It was not his fault. He had done nothing wrong. Forgive me, she said, and she broke into a run, letting her body do what it had longed to do for hours, flee. Chapter 3. Rob was torn. Should he follow her? He had not said anything wrong, and yet guilt gripped in his chest because she had been sitting with the family and he had scared her off. He cursed himself as she ascended the flight of stairs to the terrace and disappeared into the house, a phantom again. He would apologize during dinner this evening. When the dinner hour came, there was no opportunity before the meal as she clung to Mary's side. Then at the table, Kate had pandered to Caroline's insecurities and seated her in between his mother and Mary. Everyone else sat in the order of male, then female, then male, and so on. But between the women, Caroline was clearly more comfortable, more animated. She held a long conversation with Mary, smiling on occasions and gesturing as she spoke. She was beautiful, not in the striking way of his sister. There was no particularly notable element in her features. Her hair was a mixture of brown and blonde, her eyes hazel, her nose straight, her lips perhaps too broad, but the elements put together, and when her lips parted in a rare smile and her expression lit up her face, it was as though it awakened her beauty. It was fascinating watching her when she did not realize she was being watched, because he saw someone he doubted anyone but Drew and Mary knew. He was so entranced, he hardly spoke to his Aunt Jane and his cousin Eleanor, who flanked him at the table. He felt as though he were watching a rare wild creature, sitting in silence, because if he moved or spoke, she would discover him watching and run. The candlelight from the candelabras along the table made her pale skin glow. There was one small dark mole above her top lip to the right, and a sprinkle of pale freckles across the bridge of her nose, where at some point in her life she had not been careful of the sun. Her head turned and her gaze caught on his for an instant, a heartbeat, before she looked at his mother and carried on talking. In that instant, emotion struck him hard in the chest. It felt as though he had been knocked flat by a punch. He shook his head, clearing his thoughts. Catherine stood and smiled, her gaze passing across the women. Ladies, I believe it is time we left the men to their port. The other women about the table rose, and they filed from the room. Rob changed chairs, moving along to sit beside Uncle Richard. They did not take long over their port. The men in his family rarely stayed at the table for long. They preferred to spend their time with their wives. When he walked into the drawing room, at the back of the men, Rob's gaze searched for Caroline. She was sitting in her corner. Harry had jokingly labelled the chair she always sat in here Caroline's corner years ago, when one of their sisters had been about to take the seat. You'll get kicked out. That's Caroline's corner. The chair had been Caroline's corner ever since. Kate was sitting in the chair beside Caroline's, talking with her, or perhaps to her. It was laughable, really, how his whole family manoeuvred around Caroline's idiosyncrasies. Robbie? Rob turned at the sound of John's voice. I imagine you are longing to stretch your wings. I know I was excited to escape education at your age. You did not just stretch your wings, you flew off. As a child, Rob had aspired to be like his half-brother, until he realised John was so damn perfect there was no matching him. John just irked him now. They were not particularly close. In Rob's formative years, John had been away at school, and when John left education, he travelled abroad for years. He returned when their maternal grandfather died, because he inherited the Duke's title.
Yes, well, this country held no appeal when grandfather was alive. You could travel if you chose to, Rob. Your allowance is yours to do with as you will.
The words kicked Rob in the gut. Living on John's generosity was not the life he wanted.
I have not decided what I will do.
That was not true, but he would not share his political aspirations with John because John would take control of them.
Except escape Mamma's nest.
Well, yes, that obviously. Rob's gaze swung away to discover Caroline watching him. His heartbeat thumped in his chest. She looked away quickly.
Will you run riot in town, then?
Rob's attention focused back on John.
That is Harry's style, not mine. Harry is the black sheep.
John held Rob's shoulder.
Well, whatever you do, do not become a stranger.
Rob nodded, and John turned to speak with someone else. Catherine had moved from the chair beside Caroline, leaving Caroline sat looking at her hands as they rested in her lap, seemingly trying to hide amid the crowd, a phantom again. He was in no doubt that if she were at Drew's home, she would have left the room by now. He walked over.
Caroline?
He acknowledged her. The muscles in her upper body jerked, and her gaze flew up to him. She had not noticed his approach. Her hair was curled and coiffed, with a few short curls carefully positioned to kiss her cheeks, framing her face. The ringlets trained to trail the length of her slender neck had danced with her movement. She was a slight woman, small and slender, shorter than average, yet she had an unusually generous bosom. He sat in the seat beside her, twisting to face her. She leaned back, appearing to move away from him.
I am sorry I upset you this afternoon, but there was no need to run.
She stared at her hands.
Would you look at me?
Rob urged quietly, sitting further forward in the chair. No one ever challenged her. Everyone protected her. But if she would not challenge herself? The memory of his youngest sister, Jemima's aversion to spiders, came to mind. He had caught one and kept it in a glass so she could look at it, and he had eventually persuaded her to touch it. Now she would let one run across her hand. Fears ought to be faced. Her head lifted and her eyes stared at him. The candlelight picked out certain flecks of colour in her eyes that turned the hazel to molten gold.
I am staying with Drew and Mary for the summer.
He searched for the right words. I know that, Mr. Marlow, she answered. Then her eyes looked beyond him. He imagined she was looking for someone to rescue her.
Please, call me Rob, not Mr. Marlow.
Look at me, please, he said again. If she could feel comfortable talking to him, then maybe he could break her fear if he made himself the spider in a glass. She did look at him, but her gaze raged with anger, her eyes narrowing and her lips pressing together, holding in words he imagined she would like to shout. Her expression said, "Leave me alone."
Why do you not feel comfortable? He asked.
She moved, about to rise and run again. Instinctively he reached out and held her wrist.
Caroline?
He instantly regretted the action. Only Drew, Mary and the children touched her. Everyone knew she could not abide touch. It was as though a lightning bolt struck them. Her body jolted, and her expression accused him of committing murder. He removed his hand. She stood and fled to the safety of Mary. Rob felt a heel for trying to persuade her to accept him. He waited for the glance of condemnation from Mary that would confirm it. None came. Caroline must not have told Mary about his faux pas. At least no one else had noticed. He rested his elbow on the arm of the chair and his chin on his fist and watched Caroline, wondering.
You are miles away. Where are you?
Rob's Uncle Robert, the Earl of Barrington, occupied the chair Caroline had vacated. Rob leaned back, and his ankle lifted to rest on his opposite knee as he smiled. Uncle Robert was his favourite uncle, his father's brother. Rob was named after him. "I did not know you were coming," Rob said. "I thought you were returning to Yorkshire." "Jane wanted to spend some time with your mother and father before we go home. I gave in to her coercion." Aunt Jane was sitting at the pianoforte in the company of Rob's cousin Margaret, sorting through music. Rob was close to Uncle Robert because he and Harry had stayed with their uncle often in their childhood. Rob had been good friends with his cousin Henry then. Henry was his uncle's eldest son and his heir. Henry was like Harry now. They were still close friends and currently standing to one side of the room, drinking wine and laughing about something. "Have you decided what you'll do?" "No, beyond finding rooms in London during the summer." Again, he did not mention the House of Commons. He did not trust anyone to leave him alone to earn himself a seat. "The tenants are due to leave the estate which used to belong to Jane's father. If you would be interested in renting that property, I would be happy for you to take it over and cut your teeth managing the farm." His father had managed all of Uncle Robert's estates. Rob had a different plan for his life. It did not include following in his father's footsteps and being dependent on his family. "No, thank you." "It is only an offer, Robbie, not an insult." He had answered too bluntly and sounded rude. "Thank you. I am grateful for the offer." His gaze travelled to where Caroline stood. Again, she was watching him. She looked away. An odd, cramp-like pain clasped in his stomach, gripping at his solar plexus. "If you change your mind, write and let me know. I will probably not re-let it for a few months. There is some work to be done on the house." Rob looked at his uncle. "Will Henry not want it in a couple of years?" "Henry will have plenty to occupy him on my other estates, and Henry is not you. My son is reckless and self-absorbed. He will not settle to anything that requires sobriety or forethought, at least not for several years. All he is currently interested in is racing his horses." "Racing is Henry's weakness," Rob stated. Women were Harry's. "What is your weakness?" His uncle lifted an eyebrow. Rob's family believed he had none. Harry constantly teased Rob about his spotless, or rather his boring, reputation. Rob had been too busy hauling Harry out of scrapes to get into any of his own. It was true he had no vice, but he did not think himself dull. He drank excessively once, then woke up with no memory of the night before and hated not knowing what he had said or done. He had not drunk that much again. He had gambled at a card table once and lost half his allowance. That had taught him that gambling was a fool's game. Perhaps his weakness was idealism. He thought everyone should live by correct morals. But in truth, right now, "A lack of inspiration," he said, his expression mocking himself. He had this great plan, but really it was no plan at all. It was a fanciful wish. He did not have a method by which to achieve it. "Something will come along to give you purpose. Wait and see." His uncle smiled.
Are we going to dance? Will you dance with me, Papa?
Uncle Robert's eldest daughter joined them. Julie was 15. She smiled at Rob. "Julie?" Rob bowed his head in greeting.
"Robbie?"
She smiled brightly and bobbed a shallow curtsy. It was unnecessary, but she was practicing for her debut next year. Uncle Robert stood. "I shall be honoured, young lady." Beyond them, Rob caught Caroline looking again. He smiled. Pink patches stained her cheeks before she had a chance to look away. Rob stood. It would be crass of him not to partner one of his sisters or female cousins in the dancing. They danced a string of country dances, and the only person who sat out for every one of them was Caroline, yet she watched the dancing intently. If he were courageous, he would offer to partner her, but she never danced. Did she want to feel able to dance? Perhaps her fears were trapping her, and this way of living was not really her choice. Idealism was certainly his fault, because in his mind's eye he saw her dancing, talking, laughing and smiling. She had come to life when she spoke with Mary at the table. How much more would she come to life if she danced without fear? I shall dance with her by the end of the summer. The promise whispered through his thoughts. He abhorred dares. Dares were another thing that were Harry's forte. But determination was Rob's forte. If he wanted to achieve something, and he set his mind to it, he always achieved it. He must apply that belief to his ability to win a seat in the House of Commons. He must set his mind to it and be determined to achieve it. The plan would follow. Chapter 4. 3 years earlier. A piercing pain struck Caroline's jaw as the sharp edge of Albert's signet ring cut her skin. Her head snapped back, her gaze ripped from the blue of her husband's eyes. He was a villain, this man she loved. Her hand lifted to protect her face from another blow while she grasped the back of a chair to stop herself from falling. "Please, stop! I did nothing wrong."
"Nothing?"
He growled at her through teeth gritted in bitter anger. His hand lifted again. She covered her face with both hands to avoid the next strike. It hit her across the side of her head, a hard slap. Tears flooded her eyes as she fell, from the pain of the blow and the pain in her heart. "What did I do?" Caro cried, her arms covering her head as her body curled into a dormouse-like ball on the hard floorboards, making herself as small as possible.
"You lived while my son died."
The accusation rang about her bedchamber. She was cursed. She could not carry a child, could not give him the air he needed. He leaned over her, every muscle in his body taut with accusation. She loved this man regardless. "He hates me."
"Your doctor spoke to me today. He thinks you may never bear a child. He believes your womb is damaged."
Caro swallowed back the emotions catching in her throat. She knew. She'd been told. There was nothing to say in her defense. She had lost another child, and she might never be able to carry an infant to full term. Tears ran from her eyes, drowning her. How many more times? How many more children? How long could she endure this?
"I need a son. Give me a son, Caro. That is all I ask. You are capable of conceiving. You must be capable of birthing."
As the blows had stopped, she lifted a hand from her face. His gaze softened. His eyes were like the azure stones in one of her necklaces, an entrancing blue. Even in his vicious moods, when he was cold and callous, she still saw the man she married, the man who gave her months of happiness. But each time he behaved like this, a little more of her died. He turned away. How could she love a man who terrified her? Because there were the times when he was kind. She unravelled from the ball and dared to stand up. "I am trying to give you a son," she said, though her quiet voice denied it because she no longer believed she could. 5 children lay in shallow graves, beside where her husband buried his dogs, because they had not lived to be baptized and could not be buried in a churchyard. When he looked at her, there was nothing but disappointment in his eyes. Long ago, once upon a time, Caro believed in his love. Then her marriage was a happy ever after. There were many gifts and late hours dancing the nights through at balls. When they were separated in rooms, his gaze had followed her. When they walked together, gentle touches said silently, "I love you." But her happy ever after was doomed. It had never been love on his part. It had been obsession.
"Trying is not enough. I need a son. You will do your duty."
He left the room. She stared at the door as it shut behind him. Before their marriage, and throughout the first year, Albert seemed love-struck, though she could never remember him saying the word love now. Adore, treasure, worship, Those words were said. Albert had asked the Marquis of Ramlington for her hand, and the marriage had been arranged swiftly, so the Marquis could be rid of his wife's illegitimate daughter. At the time they wed, Albert had been so impassioned he would devour her body whenever he could, until she became pregnant and sickly. Then his interest waned. He set up a mistress then, and spent his evenings with her at the theatre and in the sitting rooms of the demi-monde. Yet in the days and at tun-balls he would talk to and look at Caro as though he respected and felt something warm for his wife. That was when she learned how fake those looks and gestures of love could be. It was when she lost her first child that the beatings and hatred began. He was so used to beating her now, when she conceived, he would not even think of her condition. She knew at least 2 of her miscarriages were his fault. This time, she did not know why. The doctor said her womb may well be too damaged to carry a child to full term. Albert was a handsome, powerful man. She was spellbound in the beginning. Even now, when he came to her bed, he joined with her as though he loved her. Her childhood had not contained love. He taught her what love could be, and even now she clung to those moments of intimacy and affection. She cared for him.
Ma'am, may I help you retire?
Caro had forgotten her lady's maid was in the room.
Please bring some fresh water.
The servants were as afraid of Albert's temper as she was. Like her, they sought to be silent and invisible like mice. Caro watched her reflection in the mirror as the maid dabbed at her face with a cloth to wash away the blood from her cut cheek and lip. She masked the bruises with powder and reddened Caro's lips with rouge. Albert would expect Caro to look well when he came to see her later. The sun had long since set by the time Albert returned. Caro's bedchamber was entirely dark, and he had not brought a candle. His footsteps quietly crossed the room, then the sheets beside her lifted, and the mattress dipped when he lay down.
Caro,
he said, as his hand reached for her waist. He turned her to him. The scent of brandy carried on his breath. His lips pressed on hers, and his hand held her breast, gentle now, denying that his hands could ever be brutal. Even though her lip had split, his kiss eased away the pain from the blows. The thoughtfulness he showed her at night wrapped about her soul and held her heart as his prisoner. This Albert was the man she loved. This was her marriage, cruel, heartless, beautiful love. His fingers rubbed and groped her breast, teasing her nipple to a peak through the cloth of her nightgown. Then he released the few buttons at her chest and helped her strip the garment off. He was passionate in all respects, in admiration, in anger, and in bed. Yet passion was not love. She'd learned the difference. She longed for his love. She imagined it when he was in her bed, that he touched her with love. Her hands rested on his shoulders as he moved across her. He kissed the bruise on her cheek. He did this every day, ripped her apart, then put her back together at night. And she did not even think it deliberate or mean. He was simply cold-blooded like a frog or a snake. She truly believed he had no idea how his behavior hurt her. His fingers touched her between her legs, gently caressing and calling to her body. The passion in his character pulled her to do things for him, to be what he wished, to love him with her whole self. When he entered her, she was damp between her legs. His intrusion was hard and fast, yet not painful. This was always how he loved her, with force and strength that sent her reeling. The little death swept over her after a few minutes, and in a few more he spilled his seed inside her. Another minute's tick of the mechanism of the clock on the mantel above the hearth, and he was withdrawing, disengaging, mentally as well as physically. The pain of her bruises flooded her senses, while the pain of his loss filled her soul. He kissed her cheek.
"Thank you. God willing, there will be a child soon."
Then he got up and left her rooms. When Caro rose in the morning, her maid powdered her face and neck. The powder hid the bruises, but not the swellings, so the maid used rouge to help disguise some of the swelling on her cheek. Caro chose a gown with long sleeves to hide the bruising on her arms. As she walked down to breakfast, her stomach trembled as much as her hands. The marble-lined hallway was as cold as the man who waited for her at the table. A footman bowed his head when she entered the morning room. She no longer felt humiliated by the violence in her own home. Every servant in the house knew how she was treated. It had gone on for too long for embarrassment to be a burden here. But outside the house, yes, it embarrassed her. A newspaper was folded beside his place at the table, so he could read it more easily. He looked up from the newspaper as Caro entered, and his fork lowered to the plate. She longed to see the reverent look that used to hover in his eyes. His expression today said he was watching an oddity in a village fair. When he frowned, terror, sharp and violent, cut into her chest. Had something happened? Everything that went wrong in this house was a reason to beat her. A silver spoon left with a smudge, a glass broken, a meal he did not enjoy. The servants were her responsibility, and therefore their errors were hers.
"Good morning, Caro."
He stood up and bowed his head, then sat again. A footman withdrew a seat for her at the opposite end of the table and served her breakfast. Albert was a dozen years older than her. His maturity and strength of character had seemed a blessing to her younger self. She felt safe then, protected, when he was adoring and attentive.
"I shall not be home for dinner,"
Albert said as soon as his plate was empty. He put his napkin on the table and stood. He was saying he would be with his mistress. He walked to her. She turned her cheek for him to press a quick kiss there. Then he left the room. Her torn heart bled. She had tried to be a good wife. She had tried to give him children. She had failed. He had beaten her more than a dozen times in the last month. After she lost their last child, she was unable to move for 3 days, while her face was grotesquely swollen. If I lose another child, will he kill me? Her brother Drew said Albert would kill her eventually if she did not leave him. Like her, Drew was a cuckoo in the Marquis of Framlington's nest. Her mother liked younger men, but not the children her affairs produced. Caro and Drew were unwanted and unloved children, but the origins of their birth had formed their unbreakable bond. Drew was the only person who genuinely cared for her. Drew regularly begged her to leave Albert, but he had recently married a woman with money, and that made it possible. He had promised to buy Caro a property to hide in. But how could she escape the influence and power of the 7th Marquis of Kilbride? And how could she leave when she still loved him? Yet, how do I stay? The blood about her heart congealed, and the bruises in her soul throbbed. If she stayed, more children would be conceived and die. Drew had promised to keep her safe. Could he? She lay her knife and fork on her plate and rose, her breakfast barely touched, as her mouth was too sore to eat. She left the room. Her fingers slid along the stone banister as she climbed the stairs in the hall. If she stayed, nothing would be better. It could only become worse. She would always have to look into the eyes of the man she loved and see how she disappointed him. As she stepped from the last stair onto the first-floor landing, she knew in her heart she'd made a decision that would change her life. For better or worse, she must leave Albert. This was a poisoned marriage. Yet she would leave a part of herself here. Her wounded heart and soul would remain with the man she loved. And she would always be grateful for the first year of their marriage, when she had known what love might be. If she did not leave, Drew was probably right. Albert would kill her in the end. Chapter 5. Caro descended from the coat of arms embossed carriage her husband provided for her, holding the hand of a footman. Her foot touched the pavement of Tavistock Street, the address of her modiste, and her heart raced, its rhythm running through her veins. The air petrified in her lungs, yet she refused to let her hold tighten about the footman's hand or tremble. He must not sense her fear. Her husband may not love her, but he had her watched like a hawk. Her family's reputation for setting up intrigues, her own birth being evidence of it, meant Albert did not trust her. He would not have a cuckoo in his nest. He had his mistress, but Caro must be devotedly his. So his most trusted staff went everywhere with her. The street was busy. A throng of people flowed past, even though it was still relatively early. She hoped the crowded pavement would help her. The footman led the way into the shop, raising a hand to stop passers-by so she could cross. The bell above the door jangled as he opened it, and she followed him in. The broad bow window display showed off some of the fabrics and fashions that lined the shelving and counters inside the shop. Half a dozen customers were looking at lace, ribbons and fabrics on the counters, and fashion plates for the styles they wanted made. How long would it take the footman to realize something was amiss? Caro's eyes scanned the occupants through the netting of the veil she wore to cover her identity as much as the bruising. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew no one, and she hoped no one bar the modiste would know her. She held her reticule carefully as she crossed the room, hiding the weight of the jewellery in it, trying to make the purse appear as light as usual. She had taken the jewellery from its boxes and put all the gifts he gave her in their first year into her purse. It would help pay for her keep. She did not want to be entirely dependent on Drew, and she would live quietly and spend little, so she hoped the money from these things would last.
May I see some fabrics for a ball gown?
Caro asked the modiste's assistant. The woman lifted some folds of fabric off the shelves. This was the last time Caro would look at such fine things. She picked a very delicate pale pink, then thumbed through the fashion book, her heartbeat racing. She left the book open on a page and leaned forward and asked the assistant discreetly,
May I use your convenience, please?
Her voice trembled. She coughed as if clearing her throat. She must not appear nervous. When Albert's footman attempted to follow Caro through a door at the back of the shop, the assistant shooed him away. She was led through a workroom and then outside to a cold closet that looked more like a coal store. The small space contained a chamber pot. Caro had used the closet once before, so she would know if an escape was possible.
I will find my own way back,
she said to the shop woman. As soon as the assistant left her, Caro ran to the gate at the back of the shop yard. It was unlocked, as it had been the day she checked this escape route. She opened it. Drew waited there, as he promised he would. Caro. She shut the door. He took her hand. Come. Did the modiste query your exit?
No, I asked if I might use the convenience, but there is a footman waiting in the shop.
Then we must hurry. He led her into a run across the uneven cobbles of the narrow alley. I hired the carriage in a false name. We will change to another when we are out of London and go the opposite way, then change again so we cannot be easily followed. Where was Kilbride when you left?
In the House of Lords. They will be sitting for hours, and none of the servants will be able to speak to him there.
The carriage stood at the end of the alley, the door ajar. Drew pulled it wide and held it while she climbed in. Go! He called up to the driver as he followed her in and shut the door. Pull down the blind, he told her, as he pulled down the one on his side, covering the small window in the carriage door. Caro's hands shook as she opened her reticule and showed him the jewellery she had brought. Drew smiled awkwardly. "I will sell them for you. They will help you live for years." She hoped for that. He needed his wife's dowry to find his own happiness. He lifted the edge of the blind, peering around as the carriage drove along the street, past the modistes. When the servants discovered her gone, there would be bedlam. They would fear Albert's response. She did too. She could only hope he never found her. Drew held her hand, offering reassurance. She held his hand as firmly, trying to offer reassurance to him too. He had told her his wife left him. His fledgling marriage was failing already. They were both flawed, scarred by an unpleasant childhood, and on top of that, Drew had the curse of male pride. He would not plead his case and try to persuade his wife to forgive him. When the last of the carriages on their higgledy-piggledy route rocked to a halt, they had been travelling for a couple of hours. "We will walk from here," Drew said. Their route had avoided the busy roads and tall houses, and so her bottom was sore from bouncing along rucked mud tracks. He opened the door and knocked down the step, handed her down, and shouted up to the driver, asking him to rest the horses and wait for him at the coaching inn. "Our aunt shall be so pleased to see us," he said in a loud voice to Caro, and held up his forearm, pretending to anyone in the stable yard this was a casual event. She lay her hand on his coat sleeve, her heartbeat fluttering. They strolled past a shallow ford, across the River Medway, and past a large ornate building, the Bishop's Palace, as though this was a day out. She looked everywhere for any sign of someone following, but no one around them was behaving unusually, and how could Albert have followed her when his servants had not known she left? A cold shiver in her told her she would be looking over her shoulder for someone forever. They continued until they reached a row of whitewashed, thatched, terraced cottages. Most of the square front gardens, tucked behind a long stone wall, were filled with vegetable plants, but the middle garden was a beautiful muddle of blooming flowers. Drew opened the gate. They walked up the path. This was the entrance to her new life. Drew knocked. The door opened. A middle-aged woman, clothed in unrelenting black, stood there. "Go in." Drew hurried Caro on and shut the door behind them. It was a dark cottage, with small windows and low ceilings, and cold, with its thick walls and stone flags on the floor, but it was clean, and the woman had made it homely. The scent of baking bread filled the air, and rag rugs lay on top of the stone paving slabs. But Caro had come from wealth, and it was a long way to fall to this, and all because she could not carry a child. She often wondered what her life would have been like if the first child had been born healthy. Would the beatings have never begun? "This is Mrs. Martin." Drew introduced the housekeeper. "She is a widow. She will live in the second bedchamber, so you will never be alone." He looked at the housekeeper, who bobbed a curtsy.